The fastest way to lose the person you love is to believe they'll always stay. The ballroom glittered like a field of stars trapped beneath crystal chandeliers. Soft music drifted through the air. Laughter echoed between marble columns. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne. From the outside, it looked like a perfect night. The kind people envied, the kind magazines photographed, the kind that made strangers believe happiness could be purchased with enough money. I stood near the back of the room, one hand wrapped around a sealed hospital envelope hidden beneath my shawl. My husband was standing 20 feet away, surrounded by politicians, investors, and people whose names appeared on the front pages of newspapers. Damian Romano looked exactly like the man the city feared and admired. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed. Every eye followed him when he moved, every conversation paused when he spoke. 8 years ago, that confidence had fascinated me. Tonight it felt like a wall I could no longer climb. Someone at his table made a joke about marriage. The group laughed. Another man raised his glass. "Come on, Damian, tell us the secret. 8 years with the same woman? That deserves an award." More laughter followed. I smiled automatically, expecting Damian to say something charming, something warm, something that reminded me of the man who once drove 3 hours through a snowstorm just to bring me soup when I had the flu. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "Marriage isn't complicated," he said. "If this one doesn't work out, I can always marry again." The table erupted with laughter. Glasses clinked together. Someone slapped him on the shoulder. Across the room, nobody noticed my smile disappear. Nobody noticed my fingers tightening around the envelope until the edges pressed into my skin. Nobody noticed that my heart seemed to forget how to beat for a second. Damian laughed with them. He didn't look toward me. He didn't see me standing there. He didn't see the expression on my face. Maybe that was the problem. He hadn't really seen me in a long time. I turned away before anyone could notice, before the tears gathering in my eyes could betray me. The terrace doors opened with a quiet hiss as I stepped outside. Cold April air wrapped around me immediately. The city stretched beneath the rooftop in a sea of lights. Car horns drifted up from the streets below. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly before fading away. I rested my hands on the railing and stared into the darkness. The envelope felt heavier than paper should feel. He didn't know what was inside. He didn't know I had spent the afternoon sitting in a cardiologist's office listening to words that still didn't feel real. He didn't know I had driven to this gala fighting tears the entire way. He didn't know because I hadn't told him. Because every time I tried, another meeting appeared. Another phone call interrupted us. Another emergency demanded his attention. I heard the ballroom doors open behind me and instinctively turned, expecting Damian. Instead, it was only another guest searching for fresh air. Relief and disappointment arrived together. I looked down at my wedding ring. The diamond caught the city lights and scattered them across the gold band. 8 years, thousands of memories, thousands of promises. And tonight, for the first time, I wondered whether I had been holding our marriage together alone. Inside, the party continued. Music played. Glasses clinked. Damian laughed somewhere beyond the walls. I slipped the hospital envelope into my purse and made a decision that would change both of our lives. Forever. 1 hour later, I would be gone, and my husband still wouldn't understand why I did not go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city while rain tapped softly against my windshield. Midnight traffic moved in thin streams beneath glowing streetlights, and every reflection looked blurred, like the world itself could not decide what it wanted to be. My hand stayed locked around the steering wheel. The hospital envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me. I had spent the last 6 hours pretending my life was normal, smiling, greeting guests, standing beside my husband while carrying a secret heavy enough to crush me. At a red light, I finally reached for the envelope again. The paper crackled beneath my fingers. I already knew every word inside, but somehow I kept hoping they would change. That if I opened it enough times, a different answer would appear, a different future. The cardiologist had been kind, too kind. Doctors become gentle when they have news they wish they did not have to deliver. I remembered the way he folded his hands across the desk before speaking. I remembered the silence that followed his explanation. The condition was rare, aggressive, unpredictable. Some patients lived for years, others did not. No guarantees, no promises, no certainty. Only monitoring, treatment, and hope. Hope. Such a small word for something that suddenly felt impossible to hold. The traffic light turned green. I drove another few blocks before pulling into a quiet parking lot overlooking the Hudson River. The rain had stopped. Across the water, Manhattan glittered like a kingdom built from light. Somewhere behind those lights, Damian was probably still at the gala, still shaking hands. still smiling for photographs, still completely unaware that his wife was sitting alone trying not to fall apart. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, my wedding ring pressed cool against the leather. 8 years. 8 years of building a life together. 8 years of believing that no matter how busy he became, no matter how complicated his world grew, we would always find our way back to each other. But lately, it felt as if we lived in parallel lives instead of a shared one. I knew his schedule better than he knew my fears. I knew which coffee he preferred, which tie he wore when he needed confidence, which nights he struggled to sleep. Yet he had not noticed I had been visiting specialists for months. He had not noticed the growing stack of medical paperwork hidden in my desk drawer. He had not noticed the way I sometimes paused halfway up a staircase to catch my breath. Maybe I had become too good at hiding it. Maybe he had become too busy looking everywhere except at me. My phone buzzed suddenly. Damien. His name illuminated the screen. For one impossible second, hope surged through me. Maybe he had noticed. Maybe he had realized something was wrong. Maybe he was calling because he cared, I answered. Emily? His voice carried background noise and distant music. Where did you go? I closed my eyes. Not are you okay, not what happened, not I am sorry, just where did you go? I needed some air, I said quietly. You left without telling anyone. People are asking where you are. I stared at the river beyond the windshield. I am sure they will survive not knowing. Silence stretched between us. For a moment, I thought he might hear the pain hidden beneath my words. Instead, another voice called his name in the background. Listen, he said, we will talk when I get home. Then the line disconnected. I lowered the phone slowly. The darkness inside the car suddenly felt enormous. Home. The word echoed through my mind. The truth was, I no longer knew whether home was a place, a person, or a memory. My fingers moved to my wedding ring again. This time, I did not stop them. And for the first time in 8 years, I slowly slid the ring from my finger. The absence of a single ring should not have felt so heavy. Yet as I held it in my palm, it seemed to weigh more than everything else in my life combined. I stared at the thin circle of gold resting against my skin while the city lights shimmered across the river. 8 years reduced to something that could fit inside a closed hand. I expected to cry. I expected some dramatic moment where my heart finally broke in half. Instead, I felt strangely calm, exhausted, like someone who had spent years carrying a burden and finally admitted they could not carry it any farther. By the time I pulled into the driveway of our estate, it was nearly 1 in the morning. The massive house stood silent beneath the moonlight. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected silver light across the empty grounds. Most people would have called it beautiful. I used to call it home. Tonight it felt like a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. The front door opened with familiar ease. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. Fresh flowers decorated the entry table. The grandfather clock ticked steadily from the hallway. A lamp glowed softly near the staircase. Nothing had changed, and somehow that hurt more than if everything had. I climbed to the stairs slowly. Halfway up, I paused to catch my breath. The tightness in my chest returned, sharp enough to make me grip the railing. After several seconds, it eased. Another symptom, another reminder, another secret Damien never noticed. When I reached our bedroom, I stood in the doorway and looked around. His side of the room was immaculate. Mine looked lived in. A novel rested on the nightstand beside reading glasses I rarely needed before this year. A half-finished sketchbook sat near the window. A framed photograph from our 5th anniversary smiled back at me from the dresser. Damien had his arm around my shoulders in that picture. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Maybe happiness is simply easier to recognize after it is gone. I walked to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase. The sound of the zipper echoed through the room. One bag. That was all I planned to take. A few clothes, important documents, medication. Nothing else mattered. As I packed, memories followed me from shelf to shelf. The sweater Damien bought during a trip to Vermont. The scarf he wrapped around my neck one freezing December night. The birthday card he wrote before business became more important than conversations. Before meetings replaced dinners. Before silence became normal. I sat on the edge of the bed holding that old card for a long moment. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Back then he had written entire pages. Now most of our conversations happened through text messages and calendar reminders. My chest tightened again, but this time it had nothing to do with my condition. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. Martha stood in the doorway. She had worked for our family for almost 10 years, long enough to become something closer to an aunt than an employee. Her eyes moved from the suitcase to my face. She understood immediately. "Emily," she whispered, "are you leaving?" I looked down at the wedding ring resting on the comforter beside me. For a moment I could not answer. Then I nodded. Martha crossed the room and sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence carries more truth than words ever could. Finally, she reached for my hand. "Does he know?" she asked softly. A sad smile touched my lips. "That is the problem." My voice cracked. "I do not think he knows anything anymore." Tears filled Martha's eyes. Mine remained dry. I felt too empty for tears. After several moments, I stood and walked toward the dresser. The wedding ring caught the lamplight one final time. Slowly, carefully, I placed it inside a small velvet box. Then I set the box on Damien's pillow where he could not possibly miss it. Beneath it, I placed a folded note containing only 7 words. 7 words that would change everything when he finally came home. Damien Romano did not return home until nearly 3 in the morning. The gala had stretched longer than expected. Investors wanted meetings, reporters wanted photographs, associates wanted his attention. By the time his driver pulled through the front gates, exhaustion sat heavily on his shoulders. The house was silent when he stepped inside. No lights waited for him upstairs. No music drifted from Emily's art studio. No sign of the woman who had shared this home with him for 8 years. He loosened his tie while climbing the staircase. His phone buzzed twice with business messages. He ignored both. All he wanted was sleep. The bedroom door opened. Damien stopped immediately. Something felt wrong. The room looked untouched, yet strangely empty. The lamp beside Emily's side of the bed was off. Her favorite blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the mattress. The air carried none of the lavender scent she usually sprayed before sleeping. He frowned. "Emily?" No answer. He crossed the room and noticed the velvet box resting on his pillow. For a second he assumed it was a gift, some delayed anniversary surprise. Then he saw the folded note underneath. His pulse slowed. An unfamiliar unease settled into his chest. He picked up the paper and unfolded it. 7 words stared back at him. "I hope someday you can marry again." Damien read the sentence twice, then a third time. The room seemed unusually quiet. His gaze shifted toward the velvet box. Suddenly he did not want to open it. A strange feeling told him he already knew what was inside. His fingers moved anyway. The lid lifted. The wedding ring reflected the soft bedside light. Everything inside him froze. The gold band looked impossibly small resting against the dark velvet. 8 years of marriage reduced to a single object. Damien stared at it without blinking. His first reaction was confusion, then irritation, then something far worse, fear. He reached for his phone immediately. Emily answered every call, always, even when she was angry, even when they argued, even when she needed space. Tonight the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again, voicemail again, voicemail, Emily. His voice sounded different than usual, less controlled. He walked into the hallway. "Martha." A moment later the housekeeper appeared from the far end of the corridor wearing a robe. Her expression changed the instant she saw his face. "Sir?" Damien held up the ring. "Where is she?" Martha remained silent. Where did she go? Still silence. For the first time in years, Damien felt genuinely unsettled. "Martha," the older woman looked down. "She left several hours ago." "Left where?" "She did not tell me." Damien studied her carefully. Martha had never lied to him. Tonight she looked as though she wanted to. "When is she coming back?" The housekeeper's eyes filled with sadness. "I do not know." Damien laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "She is angry, that is all." Martha said nothing. She heard a joke at the gala. She overreacted. She will cool off. The silence that followed felt louder than any argument. Slowly Martha reached into her robe pocket and removed a large white envelope. Damien recognized the hospital logo immediately. His stomach tightened. "She asked me to give this to you if you came home tonight." The envelope changed hands. Suddenly the room felt colder. Damien stared at the logo. 100 explanations raced through his mind. None of them made sense. Emily rarely visited doctors. She hated hospitals. He opened the envelope. Medical reports slid into his hands. Test results, specialist evaluations, appointment records stretching back months. His eyes moved across the pages. One date, then another, then another. The appointments covered nearly half a year. His wife had been seeing specialists for 6 months without telling him. Or perhaps she had tried to tell him, and he had not been listening. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Emily standing in his office doorway 3 months earlier asking if they could talk. He had postponed the conversation because of a conference call. Another memory followed. Emily mentioning a doctor appointment during breakfast. He had been answering emails and barely looked up. Then another and another. Small moments, tiny dismissals. Things that seemed insignificant at the time. Damien lowered the papers. The wedding ring remained inside the velvet box beside him. For the first time that night, he was no longer thinking about a joke spoken at a gala. He was thinking about everything he had failed to see. Then his eyes landed on a diagnosis buried halfway through the report, and the color drained from his face. The diagnosis blurred before Damien's eyes. He read the line once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might somehow change reality. It did not. The words remained exactly where they were, cold, permanent, unforgiving. His hand tightened around the medical report. Suddenly, the massive house felt too quiet, too large, too empty. He lowered himself onto the edge of the bed without realizing he was doing it. The velvet box remained open beside him. Emily's wedding ring reflected the soft light from the lamp. For years, he had viewed that ring as something permanent, a fact of life, like sunrise, like breathing, like Emily herself. Now both felt fragile. Martha stood silently near the doorway. She had served the family long enough to understand when words were useless. Damien stared at the stack of documents spread across the comforter. Appointment dates, test results, specialist consultations, follow-up evaluations. Entire chapters of Emily's life had unfolded without him. Not because she was hiding from him, because he had not been paying attention. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. 6 months earlier, Emily standing in the kitchen holding her coffee mug with both hands. She had looked nervous. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. Damien remembered glancing at his watch. A meeting was starting in 10 minutes. He had kissed her forehead and promised they would talk later. Later never happened. Another memory followed. Emily canceling a weekend trip they had planned. She claimed she was tired. He remembered feeling mildly annoyed. He never asked why. Then another memory. Emily sitting quietly through dinner while he answered messages on his phone. She had looked like she wanted to say something. He barely looked up. The realization settled over him piece by piece. She had not hidden her struggle. He had simply failed to notice it. Damien stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. Pale gray light spread across the grounds outside. He suddenly remembered the phone call from earlier. Emily had sounded distant. Not angry, not emotional. Distant. As though she had already begun letting go. The thought made something twist painfully inside his chest. He reached for his phone. This time he did not call her. Instead, he opened their message history. Thousands of messages filled the screen. At first glance, it looked like the record of a healthy marriage. Then he started reading. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Emily asking how his day went. Emily reminding him to eat lunch. Emily checking whether he arrived safely after a trip. Emily wishing him luck before important meetings. Emily sending photographs of sunsets, paintings, flowers, small pieces of life. His responses grew shorter the farther he scrolled. Running late, busy, call you later, meeting tomorrow, not now. He closed his eyes. The evidence was all there, not in the medical reports, not in the diagnosis, in the tiny moments he had dismissed for years. The moments that actually built a marriage. His phone suddenly vibrated, an incoming call from his chief assistant. Damien answered immediately. "Sir, everything all right?" Normally, Damien would have discussed business. Today, he interrupted before the man finished speaking. "Find Emily." Silence followed. "Sir, find my wife." His voice came out rougher than intended. "I want every available resource looking for her." Another pause. "Did something happen?" Damien looked toward the wedding ring resting on the bed. Yes. His reflection stared back from the dark window. For the first time in years, he did not see the powerful man everyone else saw. He saw a husband who had been absent while standing only feet away. "Something happened a long time ago," he said quietly. After ending the call, he walked back to the bed. The medical records remained scattered across the blankets. One page had slipped free from the stack. A handwritten note sat attached to the corner. The handwriting belonged to Emily. His breath caught as he lifted the page. There were only 2 sentences written in blue ink, and after reading them, Damien realized the situation was even worse than he had imagined. The note trembled slightly in Damien's hand, though he would have denied it if anyone had asked. Emily's handwriting was neat as always, every letter carefully formed. The first sentence hit him hard enough. The second nearly stopped his breathing. "I tried to tell you 3 times. I stopped trying after you stopped listening." He read the words over and over until they blurred together. Not because they were complicated, because they were true. Every memory from the past year suddenly looked different. Every missed dinner, every postponed conversation, every time Emily had stood quietly waiting while he finished one more call, one more meeting, one more urgent problem that now felt meaningless. Dawn fully arrived outside the windows. The estate slowly woke around him. Staff moved downstairs. Coffee brewed somewhere in the kitchen. Birds crossed the pale morning sky. Yet Damien remained frozen beside the bed, surrounded by evidence of a life he had failed to notice disappearing. His phone rang repeatedly throughout the morning. He ignored most of the calls. The few he answered lasted less than 30 seconds. For the first time in years, business came second. Emily came first. By noon, every resource available to him was searching. Drivers were contacted. Airports were checked. Hotels reviewed reservation lists. Credit card activity was monitored. Yet hour after hour, nothing appeared. It was as if Emily had stepped out of her life and vanished completely. By late afternoon, frustration mixed with fear. Damien stood in his office staring at a city skyline he usually loved. Today it looked distant, unimportant. His chief assistant entered carrying a tablet. "We found her vehicle." Damien turned instantly. "Where?" "A parking garage near the Hudson River. Security footage shows her leaving around midnight." Hope surged through him. "And then?" The assistant hesitated. "She took a taxi." "To where?" "We do not know. The driver paid cash for fuel shortly afterward and does not remember the destination." Damien closed his eyes briefly. Emily never carried much cash, yet somehow she had planned enough to disappear. The realization frightened him more than he expected. This was not an impulsive decision. She had been preparing, while he attended meetings, while he signed contracts, while he assumed tomorrow would always arrive exactly the same as today. Another file appeared on his desk that evening. One of his employees had recovered backup records from Emily's personal storage account. Damien opened it expecting photographs. Instead, he found folders, hundreds of files, charity donations, scholarship applications, medical assistance grants, community projects. For nearly an hour, he sat silently reviewing documents. Again and again, Emily's name appeared. Quiet contributions, anonymous gifts, emergency tuition payments, assistance for struggling families, hospital bills paid without recognition. Some dated back years. Many involved people Damien had never heard of. Yet each record showed the same pattern. Emily helping others while asking for nothing in return. His throat tightened. There was even a scholarship fund established 5 years earlier. She had named it after his mother. He stared at the document in disbelief. His mother had passed away before their marriage. Emily had never mentioned the fund, never asked for praise, never told him it existed. She simply created it and continued funding it quietly every year. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Martha entered carrying a small cardboard box. "I found this in her art studio." Damien accepted it carefully. Inside sat dozens of unopened letters tied together with a blue ribbon. Each envelope had his name written across the front. None had been mailed. None had been given to him. He untied the ribbon slowly. The first letter was dated almost 4 years earlier. His pulse quickened. Whatever Emily had been unable to say aloud, she had written here instead. And judging by the number of envelopes in the box, there was far more he did not know. Damien opened the first letter with hands that felt strangely unfamiliar. The paper was slightly worn around the edges, as though Emily had unfolded it countless times before deciding not to send it. He recognized the date immediately. 4 years ago, a week after their anniversary. He began reading. The words were simple, honest, painfully honest. She wrote about a dinner reservation she had spent 3 weeks planning. She wrote about waiting at the restaurant for nearly 2 hours before learning he had canceled through an assistant. She wrote that she understood business emergencies happened. She wrote that she was not angry. Then came the sentence that made him close his eyes. "I do not miss your time anymore. I miss feeling important to you." Damien lowered the page. He remembered that night. At the time it seemed insignificant, just another schedule conflict. Yet for Emily it had been important enough to write about, important enough to preserve. He opened another letter, then another. Hours disappeared. The second letter described a charity event where she stood alone while photographers crowded around him. The third described a vacation that became a business trip halfway through. The fourth contained no complaints at all, only memories. Emily recalling their first apartment, their first Christmas, the cheap sofa they could barely afford, the way he used to leave handwritten notes in her purse before work. Damien stared at that page for a long time. He had forgotten those notes entirely. Emily never had. Outside the office window, darkness settled over the city again. Nearly 24 hours had passed since she disappeared. Still no confirmed location, still no call, still no message. Yet through the letters, Damien felt closer to her than he had in years. One envelope near the bottom caught his attention. Unlike the others, it was sealed. The date written on the front was only 3 weeks old. His chest tightened as he carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting looked less steady than before. "Dear Damien, today the doctor confirmed what I already suspected. I sat in the parking lot for 47 minutes afterward because I could not figure out how to drive home. Not because I was afraid of the diagnosis, because I was afraid of telling you." The words blurred. Damien swallowed hard and continued reading. "I kept imagining the conversation. I imagined you taking my hand. I imagined us sitting together. I imagined not feeling alone. Then I realized I no longer knew if you had room for that conversation in your life." A sharp ache spread through his chest. He continued. "The strange thing is that I still love you. That never changed. I just do not know if being loved and being remembered are the same thing." Damien set the letter down immediately. The room felt too small. He stood and walked toward the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Far below, headlights moved through the streets like rivers of light. He remembered every excuse he had ever made, every promise to spend more time at home, every assurance that things would slow down next month, next quarter, next year. The truth was unbearable in its simplicity. Emily had never asked for perfection. She had fallen to ask matter. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His chief assistant entered quickly, carrying a folder. For the first time all day, the man's expression looked different, hopeful. "Sir," he said carefully, "we found something." Damien turned instantly. "What is it?" The folder opened. Inside was a photograph from a small coastal town nearly 300 miles away. Security footage from a local pharmacy taken that afternoon. The image was grainy, slightly blurred, yet there was no mistaking the woman stepping through the doorway, Emily. And for the first time since she vanished, Damien finally knew where to begin looking. The drive took nearly 5 hours. Rain followed me for most of the journey, drifting across the highway in thin gray curtains while mile after mile disappeared beneath the headlights. By the time I reached the coastal town, the storm had passed. The sky glowed with the soft gold light of late afternoon. Small fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor. Seagulls drifted above the shoreline. Everything about the place felt peaceful. The kind of peace Emily had spent years searching for, while I remained too busy to notice she needed it. The photograph from the pharmacy sat folded inside my jacket pocket. It was the only reason I knew where to begin. I spent the next 2 hours walking through town asking questions. Most people remembered her. She had smiled at strangers, bought coffee from a local bakery, sat reading near the marina. Somehow she had already left an impression here. The realization hurt more than I expected. Emily could make herself memorable in a place she had known for 3 days. Yet I had spent years forgetting to truly see her. The property manager finally pointed me toward a small white cottage overlooking the ocean. My pulse quickened immediately. Every instinct told me to run, to rush toward the door, to fix everything before another second passed. For years I had solved problems by moving fast, by taking control, by forcing outcomes. But standing on that narrow path above the cliffs, I realized that was exactly how I had broken us in the first place. So I walked slowly instead. The ocean stretched endlessly below. Waves rolled against dark rocks. Wind carried the scent of salt through the air. Then I saw her. Emily sat alone on a weathered bench facing the water. A blanket rested around her shoulders. Her hair moved gently in the breeze. For a moment I simply watched. The distance between us was only a few yards. It felt much farther. Eventually she turned. Our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. I expected anger. I expected tears. Instead I found something worse. Resignation. The look of someone who had already accepted disappointment. I stepped closer. "Emily." Her expression barely changed. "You found me. I was looking for you." A faint smile touched her lips. "That is new." The truth in those 3 words landed heavily. I nodded. "You are right." Surprise flickered across her face. Perhaps she expected excuses. I had plenty. None mattered anymore. We stood facing each other while the waves crashed below. Finally, I spoke again. "I read the letters." Emily looked toward the horizon. "You were never supposed to. I should have listened before you had to write them." Silence followed. The wind grew stronger. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Instinctively, I removed my jacket and held it out. She looked at it, then at me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Eventually, she shook her head. "I am fine." The old version of me would have insisted. The old version of me would have decided what was best for her. Instead, I lowered the jacket and simply nodded. A small thing, yet somehow it felt important. Emily noticed it too. We sat on separate ends of the bench. The ocean stretched before us in shades of blue and silver. Minutes passed without conversation. For the first time in years, I allowed silence to exist without rushing to fill it. Eventually, Emily spoke. "How long are you staying?" I looked out at the water. "As long as it takes." She studied me carefully. "You have meetings?" "Not anymore." "People depend on you." I nodded slowly. "You depended on me too." Her eyes filled with emotion before she quickly looked away. Another long silence followed. Then she asked the question I had been dreading since the moment I arrived. "What happens when you go home?" I stared at the waves. This was the moment. Not a speech, not an apology, a choice. "I already called my board this morning." Emily turned toward me. "What?" I stepped away from half my responsibilities. Her expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. "Damien, I spent years saying I would make time later." My voice grew quiet. I ran out of later. The ocean wind carried the words away. Emily looked down at her hands. For the first time since I arrived, the wall between us seemed slightly smaller. Not gone, just cracked. Then she whispered something so softly I almost missed it. "I do not know if I can trust you yet." The honesty hurt, but I welcomed it. Because trust was not something I could ask for anymore. It was something I would have to earn. 3 weeks later, The ocean still greeted us every morning with the same steady rhythm. Waves rolled toward the shore, seagulls drifted across the sky. The small coastal town continued moving at its own peaceful pace. Yet everything inside my life had changed, not all at once. Not because of a dramatic promise. Not because Emily suddenly forgave me. Change happened in smaller ways, harder ways, real ways. I rented the cottage next door instead of staying with her. I attended every medical appointment she allowed me to join. I learned the names of her doctors. I learned the medications she carried. I learned which days left her exhausted and which days gave her enough energy to walk along the beach. Most importantly, I learned how to listen without trying to fix everything. Some days Emily spoke openly. Other days she barely said a dozen words. I stayed anyway. There were mornings when she sat alone watching the sunrise. I sat several feet away and watched it with her. There were afternoons when she painted near the cliffs. I brought coffee and never interrupted. There were evenings when fear overwhelmed her. I did not offer speeches, I simply remained there. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the distance between us began to change. Not disappear, change. One rainy afternoon, nearly a month after I arrived, my phone rang for the first time in days. The board wanted another meeting. Investors wanted decisions. Several major projects required approval. The old version of me would have answered immediately. Instead, I silenced the phone and returned it to my pocket. Emily noticed. "You should take that." I looked toward the ocean. "No." She studied me carefully. "That used to be impossible for you." A faint smile touched my lips. "A lot of things used to be impossible for me." For the first time, she smiled back. It lasted only a second, yet it felt bigger than every business victory I had ever celebrated. 2 days later, we walked along the shoreline together. The tide was low. The sand stretched wide beneath the afternoon sun. Emily moved slowly, but she seemed stronger than when I first arrived. We stopped near a cluster of rocks where waves broke into white foam. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she reached into her coat pocket. My heart stopped when I saw what she was holding. The wedding ring. The same ring she had left behind. The same ring that had shattered the illusion I had been living inside. Emily stared at it quietly. "Do you know why I left this?" she asked. I nodded. "Because you were done waiting." Tears filled her eyes. "No." I looked at her in surprise. She closed her fingers around the ring. "Because I wanted to know whether you would come looking for me or whether you would simply move on." The truth hit me harder than I expected. All those years, all those disappointments, somewhere inside, Emily had needed proof that she mattered enough to be chosen, not once, every day. I stepped closer. "I would cross every mile in this country to find you." Her eyes searched mine, not for confidence, for sincerity. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I know." The words barely rose above a whisper, yet they meant everything. Emily looked down at the ring one final time before placing it gently in my hand. "I am not ready to wear it again." A small ache touched my chest. Then she continued, "But I am not ready to throw it away either." Hope arrived quietly, not as certainty, not as a perfect ending, as possibility. We stood together watching the waves roll toward shore. The future remained uncertain. The diagnosis remained real. There were still difficult days ahead. But for the first time in years, we were facing them honestly, side by side. I slipped the ring carefully into my pocket and reached for her hand. This time she did not pull away. As the sun began sinking toward the horizon, painting the water gold, I realized something I should have understood long ago. Love is not proven by grand declarations. It is proven by presence, by showing up when it is inconvenient, by listening when it is easier to speak, by staying when leaving would be simpler. And as Emily's fingers remained wrapped around mine, while the lighthouse beams swept across the darkening sea, I finally understood that being chosen once is a gift. Being chosen again after failing someone is a miracle.